The thing about a large language model that I love is that what you get out is so directly influenced by what you put in. And to just say, write this email for me, do this brief for me, give me this meal plan is just missing such a big opportunity. Hey all, I'm Jenny, also known as Queen of Swords, and today I want to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart, which is the intersection between AI and humans. I love AI. I love humans. I see a lot of conversation about what AI can do and can't do, how AI is changing, but I see very few conversations about how using AI is changing us for better or worse. And today I want to talk about something really meaningful, and that is critical thinking and why it's so important. Don't want to live in an idiocracy? Keep watching. One of the things I see a lot is this conversation about kind of which timeline we're going to have. Is it going to be a utopian timeline? Is it going to be a dystopian timeline? And when it comes to AI and large language models, that conversation is often had in the context of the models. What can the models do? What do the models know? How smart are the models? And I very seldom see much conversation about how what humans do impact that timeline outside of, like what the people at the top of the frontier labs do, how evil they are, not evil. But a big thing I think a lot about is the two paradigms that I see are think with me and think for me. And a lot of the mainstream conversation around large language models tends to push us in this think for me direction. You have these new models like the GPT-01 series that are very much like, we're going to go do the thinking in the background. You're going to come back 10 minutes later and you're going to get the answer and we're going to have figured it out for you. And that makes me incredibly nervous because as much as there's potential for this technology to be hugely empowering for individuals, the more we outsource our thinking to the models and have them think for us, the more we end up heading toward a timeline where we get replaced, not supercharged. What's the difference between thinking for me and thinking with me? I'll give you an example. Say you are a strategist and you are working on a brief and you're trying to sell, I don't know, Coke to 19-year-olds around the summertime. The think for me route, the way that so many people go, is they say, give me a brief for Coca-Cola targeting 19-year-olds around why Coke is a perfect drink for the summertime. And then you end up getting a brief, and half the time you're like, well, that's kind of a crappy brief. It's not that good. But what you're doing right there is you're basically saying, do it for me, think for me, solve this for me. Where when I sit down and say, I'm going to do a brief, what I'll do is I'll say, I'm doing a brief for this brand, trying to reach this audience around this topic. What are 10 strategic frameworks that I could use that would help me tackle this brief? And the model will then go, okay, well, if you use the jobs to be done framework, you would tackle it like this. If you use the design thinking framework, it would approach it like this. If you use the blue ocean framework, it would view the problem like this. And what I think is so cool about that is whether or not I do anything else, whether or not I have the model keep working, whether or not I dig into that, I just got information that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise, right? So there might be 2 or 3 strategic frameworks that I've never heard of. And I can say, oh, wow, that framework is new to me. Tell me some more about it. How would this problem be approached from this framework? But then also I have the ability to say, you know what? I really like this element from the design thinking framework. I really like this element from the jobs to be done framework. I really like this element from the, do, be, have framework. What if we put those together into a new framework that is better and more fitting than any of those frameworks could be alone? So now I'm not just getting a brief at the end. I'm getting both exposure to frameworks I might have not considered, seeing how my specific problem looks through the lens of different perspectives, and then having the ability to kind of go across those perspectives and be able to combine them into something new, which is incredibly empowering. But the problem is that way of working with large language models is just not something that I see being talked about very much. I see people using them like Google, using them as answer engines, using them to do things for them instead of using them to do things with them so that you are getting smarter at the same time that the model is doing its job. One of my biggest fears is that we live in a world that ends up becoming completely AI moderated, right? So I use AI to write an email that gets sent to you. You use AI to understand the email. And so then now, as humans, both of us are getting farther and farther apart, which means now all of a sudden this conversation and this connection, this interaction that used to be human to human now becomes human to AI to AI to human. And I don't think that's the kind of world that anybody really, really wants. I mean, even if you ask the AI language models, they don't want that. To get specifically into the email thing, because I think this is really interesting, I really don't like it when I get an email from somebody that was clearly written by a large language model because it doesn't feel personal. And one of the things that I found is a lot of times the emails that I get that tend to be written by large language models, if they're not like cold calls, they're usually emails that I know are probably a little bit more emotional tricky for people to write, emails where they had to push back or something, emails where they had to say no, emails where they were like, no, that rate's too high. We can't afford that much, which I 100% understand. Of course, when you have something that's like a little bit emotionally tricky, one of the great things about large language models is that they can help you outsource some of that emotional labor. But what people don't realize is the outsourcing of emotional labor, the emotional support is where the value is coming from. It's not the writing of the email. So if I have a tough email to write, what I do is I say, I have a tough email to write. Let me tell you about the situation, the email I need to write, and maybe you can work with me to unpack why this feels so tough for me. So then I'm actually getting support on the part of the process that I really need support on. And then when it comes to writing the email, I don't need the model to write the email for me because writing the email is not the hard part. Dealing with some of the uncomfortable feelings that come up about pushing back, about setting a boundary, about asking for something, really sitting with those and understanding where that's coming from and working through that, that's the part where the value is. And if we fast forward to just write this email to somebody that says this, we actually lose that rich opportunity. And I think that's a big part of what worries me about all of this is that the process of doing something, the process of going through the steps of doing something is in and of itself valuable. It's not valuable just in that it leads to the output that lets you send the thing out, share the brief, do the work thing, get the email out. But actually, the mental process of going through it is where you kind of almost like do your push-ups, do your mental push-ups, do your emotional push-ups, really kind of unpack, understand, learn. And if we have a culture that's so focused on getting it done, on getting to the output, on having the model do it for you faster, cheaper than what you could do before, then we are literally throwing away in some ways the most valuable thing about these models, which is that they can scaffold our own brains, that they can expand our own understanding, that they can give us the ability to look at a situation through any eyes that we want, that they can guide us to learn whatever we're interested in. But when we continue to have this focus on efficiency, we do ourselves just such an incredible disservice. Key takeaways. First one, questions are always better than commands. The next time you open up Claude or ChatGPT, don't say, do this for me. Ask a question, any question. Ask a question like, here's what I have to do. What are 10 different ways I could tackle this? Here's something I'm working on. What are 10 different perspectives I can take as I do this? Here's an article. Instead of saying, summarize this article for me, say, here's an article. As we read through this article, what critical thinking questions are going to be especially useful to us as we discuss this article? And then discuss the article with the model. Don't just read its output. Ideally, you would read it too, but I understand that there are times in your life where, okay, say you have like 12 trend reports, and we all get trend reports, and we all have these big plans that we're going to read them, and we never do, right? They just sit there like in your aspirational downloads folder. So the difference between not reading it at all and having a large language model process it for you is it's better to do that than not read it at all. Is it better to read it yourself and then have the large language model process it for you and then discuss what you took away versus what the large language model took away? Yes. Is it okay to have a large language model process it for you if the alternative is you not reading it all? Yes. But when you have a large language model process something for you, think about what you're having it process and what you're doing, because the best value you're going to get gets when it's a dialogue. Not just like summarize this article, and then say what perspectives aren't reflected in this. Or say, oh, that's really interesting. You mentioned this point. Can we dig a little bit more into point number 3? Because that's actually in some ways the most interesting part of the article to me. And then the model will do that. And then you could say, huh, that's interesting. What other sort of theories or philosophies or frameworks or perspectives kind of are connected to this subpoint that we just explored? And then the model will be like, here you go. And now all of a sudden you have not just gotten a summary of the article, but you've actually gotten some really good critical thinking perspectives to keep in mind as you're discussing the article. You've been able to sort of hone in on something that you thought was especially interesting, and then you're able to kind of expand your understanding of that topic into sort of 5 other cross-domain topics that might be really interesting to you, but you didn't even know existed. And you can do all of that in maybe 3 or 4 times the amount of time it takes you just to summarize the article. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, it might take 10 minutes instead of 1 minute, but I'd rather spend 10 minutes making myself smarter and better than spend 1 minute getting a surface level summary that doesn't really add that much value, and that leaves all the like diamonds just there sitting not uncovered as you move on to the next thing on your to-do list. Before you go off and start practicing new critical thinking exercises with ChatGPT or Claude, I just want to say thank you for watching the video. If you like this content, if you're curious to learn more, make sure you subscribe. I'm going to be trying to do videos a little bit more regularly. Also, if you're curious to see some of my other AI talks, you can check out this video here or this video here. Thank you so much for your time. Please, no matter what, never stop questioning. Never.